Everyone to our monthly enrichment series. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Michelle McGowan. She's the Research Associate Professor, the Ethics Center at Cincinnati Children's in the Department of Pediatrics and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Cincinnati as well. So Dr. McGowan holds a Ph.D. in Women's Studies from the University of Washington and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in bioethics at the Center at CGRAIL, which is the Center for Genetic Research Ethics and Law of Case Western Reserve University. You may remember Dr. Goldenberg spoke with us in the early days of the pandemic, and he also hails from there. He, I believe, is the associate director. Is he the director now?
Associate.
Associate director. Okay. Yeah. Dr. McGowan studies the ethical and social implications of reproductive and genomic technologies in policy, and currently leads an NHGRI-funded study on implications of facilitating adolescent and young adult decision-making about receiving actionable genomic research results. As you might guess, Dr. McGowan is a longtime colleague, friend, and collaborator, and it is with great pleasure that I cede the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Torini, and thanks for the invitation to speak with you all today. I know this format you're all becoming accustomed to, but it is a little strange to just be staring at yourself in a screen while you're giving a talk. So I understand that Annie is going to be moderating any questions, so feel free to interrupt me at any time. I made sure to leave enough time for questions at the end. So as Dr. Torini mentioned, I'll be speaking with you about a project that I've been conducting on facilitating adolescent decision-making about return of genomic research results. I'll present on the results of 2 studies that I've been doing over the last 4 years and give you a sense of where we're going in the coming years as well. So the rationale for this work hails back to 2013 when the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics first released what's known colloquially as the ACMG 56 and then was later updated to the ACMG 59. This is a set of traits, genetic traits that the college believes should be returned to those who are undergoing exome or genome sequencing, regardless of the reason for the testing. So these are results that can be seen on broad genomic sequencing testing, but are known as secondary results because they may not be the reason for the testing in the first place. These 59 traits are primarily cancer traits, although there are several that relate to cardiac conditions and other metabolic disorders. And so this was a seismic shift in the era of genomics in the sense that predictive genetic testing had historically been done specifically to look for individual targeted mutations rather than to do broad array analyses. The dominant framework for pediatric ethics when it comes to predictive genetic testing has largely been to defer decisions around predictive genetic testing until the patient is an adult and can make the decisions for themselves, except under conditions in which doing predictive genetic testing may result in something that's beneficial in terms of medical management during childhood. So as you can see, this the screenshot here from a publication from the American Society of Human Genetics that was published in 2015 suggests that with the increasing array of genetic and genomic tests that are available, the recommendations for pediatric genetic testing should largely remain pretty limited. And the ACMG 59 actually flies in the face of this dominant framework by suggesting that labs and those receiving results have an obligation to return results even if they haven't been sought by those that are undergoing testing in the first place. So in the wake of these conflicting viewpoints, several professional societies, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics, and the American Society for Human Genetics have called for an engagement process between mature children, their parents, or guardians and healthcare providers around whether and when to return secondary genomic research and clinical results. So our study is an outgrowth of this call. So the aims of our studies have been to explore adolescents' reasons for choosing to learn genomic research results and their preferences for involving a parent or guardian in the decision-making process. And more recently, we've shifted to assessing the degree to which adolescent age and life circumstances factor into decisional preferences. And I'll have several screenshots throughout this presentation, as you can see on this, on the side of the screen, that are snapshots from educational videos that we have created to correspond with our study. And so all of the images that you'll see are part of the study tools that we're rolling out with adolescents ages 12 to 22. We're using the developmental model of adolescence rather than the legal definition of childhood and adulthood, at which point in most places one is designated an adult at age 18, because we recognize that there's still developmental growth in late adolescence that may, even though people have the legal right to make decisions for themselves and to enter into contracts, they may still be in an era of development in which support from guardians and parents may be useful. So we're trying to tease this out in our study to understand the differences between early and late adolescence. So I'm going to present on two phases of an ongoing study. First, which used study visits for those who are enrolling in the Electronic Medical Records and Genomics Network Phase 3, which is a return of results study. Cincinnati Children's, where I work, is one of the sites and was the only pediatric site in Phase 3 of the study that was enrolling adolescents and parent dyads to enroll in a genomic study that would have return of results that would then be entered into the electronic medical record. And so we recorded study visits in which decision-making processes around which genomic research results would be returned to the adolescent were discussed. So we recorded them and analyzed those transcripts. I'll also present on that today. And I'll also present on results from some focus groups that we conducted with research advisory boards with younger and older adolescents ranging in age from 12 to 22, just earlier this year when we could still all be in the same place at the same time. So as I mentioned, the study participants ranged in age from 12 to 22. And for those that were younger adolescents, we were recruiting them from community and hospital-based clinics. There was no clinical indication for participation, but they needed to have capacity to make decisions for themselves and willingness to register for an electronic health record patient portal at our hospital, where the results of the eMERGE3 sequencing panel, which included 109 genes, including the original ACMG 56 genes that were published in 2013, were analyzed and results were returned to participants through a study visit, but also then included in the electronic health record and shared with their primary care providers. These particular genes that were returned were established by a set of network-wide experts and experts at our institution to assess which genes would be clinically actionable and returnable at any point during the lifespan, not just during childhood. And then our more recent efforts have expanded to include older adolescents ages 18 to 22 who were recruited from local research advisory boards to inform our study tools and design. So in the first phase of our project, we coupled with the eMERGE3 network, the site-specific enrollees at Cincinnati Children's, to have adolescents ages 13 to 17 and a parent assess what types of preferences they have around return of treatable, preventable, adult onset, and a variety of carrier traits that are autosomal recessive. They used a paper decision tool and that ended with a list, like you can see here on the side of the screen, with a list of all conditions that could be associated with genetic traits that could be returnable. with a description of what type of condition it is, whether it's preventable, whether it's treatable, and whether they could receive carrier status. The earlier iteration of this didn't necessarily pull out adult onset, but in the descriptions, it usually indicated whether this was something that would be more likely to manifest in childhood or in adulthood. And participants were separated. So this is a photo of one of our genetic counselors with one of our families that enrolled in the study, where initially the adolescent and the parent were separated to make independent decisions around their preferences around returning treatable, preventable, adult onset, and carrier traits. And then they were brought together for a facilitated discussion with a genetic counselor, a nurse geneticist, or a geneticist to make a decision about whether to move forward with any of those particular types of decisions. They were given the opportunity to also select for or against specific conditions that they would learn about. So it was a two-step process. And then at the end of the study visit, only conditions for which both the parent and the adolescent agreed upon would be returned. And the interviews that we used in this process were used as a way to try to facilitate and draw out adolescents' perspectives before drawing out parents. So adolescents led in their preference models. So we audio typed and transcribed all of these sessions. There were hundreds of participants in the eMERGE3 cohort at our site, but we particularly wanted to analyze differences within the population across their preferences to receive all of the results versus some or no results. Overwhelmingly, adolescents and their parents who enrolled in this study just chose to learn everything that they could possibly learn. And so we purposely sampled 64 transcripts to analyze those 33 that chose to learn all the results and 31 that didn't choose to learn all the results, to try to understand the dynamics and the factors that influenced whether they wanted to learn all or some. We used a qualitative method for analysis called the constant comparative method, and used two coders who worked within Atlas TI qualitative data analysis software to try to understand the themes that emerged within and across these groups. So this is just an example here of the participant demographics in the study. More of our participants, about 2/3, were female, and there were more white participants than other racial and ethnic groups. There were some Black participants as well. This reflects the demographics of the area in which we live, but it's skewed more towards white participants and more female than the general population. So to see a full write-up of the study, our publication is in Genetics and Medicine on how adolescents made decisions around the type of genetic information they chose to learn and why, but I'll pull out a few of the results for you here. So what you can see in this screen is that those who chose to exclude particular types of results were more likely to exclude results that would not be treatable or not preventable than adult onset or carrier status. And you can also see that after discussion, there was some shifting away from excluding some results, and I'll explain why that is in the next screen here. So here you can see that the reasons that adolescents gave for the preferences they had around wanting to receive results or not pertain to knowledge seeking, which almost everyone said that they were interested in having knowledge or not, the actionability of the information they could receive, with a particular emphasis on preventability. So those who are interested in getting actionable information were mostly interested in trying to prevent things. They were less, treatability or non-treatability was less of an issue. And several participants also mentioned that psychosocial impacts, positive and negative, influenced their decisions for either wanting to receive or not receive information about genetic results. So in the short term, and we're talking about the span of a few hours, none of the adolescents who chose to learn all the results changed their initial choices after the joint interview. And among adolescents who wanted to learn some of the results as opposed to all, over half of those changed their initials due to either parental influence or improved understanding of what it would mean to receive or decline to receive particular types of results. So we also wanted to understand how adolescents wanted their parents to be involved in the process of decision-making. We recognized with this population, which was ages 13 to 17, that legally they needed a parent or guardian's permission to participate in a study and to receive particular types of results to go into their electronic medical record. However, as you can see here, more adolescents wanted to make decisions on their own if they wanted to learn all the results. And for those who wanted to learn some of the results, they were more inclined to favor making a decision with their parent, though just marginally so. So what this particular study taught us is that adolescents wanted to be involved in the decision-making process around genomic return of results. They could articulate reasons for their choices. They considered their parents' perspectives and often changed them as in relation to discussions with their parents about which results to return. They could weigh potential psychosocial harms and benefits associated with return of results, particularly as those pertain to changes in lifestyle or family planning. And they could make discerning choices based on their perceived ability to incorporate risks into their worldview. So preventability and treatability were very important discriminators for adolescents when making choices. And this particular phase of the study raised questions for us around the ACMG 59's mandate that there ought to be an opt-in or opt-out that defers to parental choices when we have pediatric patients in mind. Now, the pediatric or the ACMG 59 pertains specifically to exome and genome sequencing. However, it's been interpreted in the field more broadly as pertaining to any type of genomic testing that could return these types of results. So the question on the table is the extent to which parental authority really prevails in this context, given what we've learned with this relatively small sample, that adolescents really do want to be involved in the decision-making process, even if they don't have the legal capacity to make decisions on their own. So this phase of the study raised new questions for us, which resulted in a project that was funded by NHGRI and began in the fall, in which we were asking, to what extent do age and maturity factor into preferences around return of genomic test results and parental involvement in decision-making? And we're also trying to understand how portable or scalable our study materials are for wider use beyond a healthy research volunteer population at an urban pediatric hospital. So the first thing that we've been doing with this newly funded project is revising the study tools that we developed. So as I mentioned earlier, we started with a decision tool that was based on paper, and we had a 17-minute long educational video about genomic testing and return of results. Much of the feedback that we received and that colleagues of mine have published on suggested that 17-minute videos with an adolescent population is too long to keep their attention, might be too long to keep a lot of our attention. And so what we've done is segment the video out into 6 separate videos. The first is what we're designating a required video to explain what enrolling in a study that would return genomic research results would entail and what it means to provide decisions in concert with one's parents if you're under 18. And then there are a series of optional videos in which we explain what the impact of getting preventable information, non-preventable information, what carrier status can teach you, and adult onset. We try to understand what, who could have access to genomic research results, what the impact could be on one's own healthcare and on other family members. And we've also converted our paper decision tool into an electronic decision tool. This last screen at the bottom here is part of our current web-based tool that we've been piloting. We're now revising it into a mobile-first technology, meaning that we hope that people will be able to use it on a mobile phone or tablet as opposed to a laptop. and that's in development at this time. We weren't planning for a pandemic to require us to move our study to a remote delivery system, but it has fast forwarded our plans to try to make our study tools scalable and portable in an era in which people aren't going to be in person for some time. So we piloted our revised videos. Oh, I forgot to mention there was one last video that we added at the suggestion of some of the young people who participated in the earlier iteration of our study that actually uses quotes from these joint decision-making discussions that I just presented on, and has them presented by teen actors to show what kind of considerations adolescents use when trying to assess whether or not to undergo genomic testing and participate in a genomic study that would return results. So we piloted all of these tools with 4 focus groups in winter of 2020, using research advisory committees that are standing committees at the Children's Hospital where I work, and with an urban community center that is working with the hospital. The Children's Hospital Research Advisory Committee tends to be a pretty medically literate population. It's a predominantly white group, whereas the Urban Community Center Research Advisory Group is predominantly African American, and some of the participants have lower literacy and lower access to technology, so it allowed us to have a better opportunity to assess the portability of some of our research tools into settings that may not have strong Wi-Fi connections. So as I mentioned, we conducted 4 focus groups that were organized by age, 2 groups that were younger adolescents, ages 12 to 17, and 2 that were older adolescents, ages 18 to 22. So the decisional preferences and confidence that we assessed with this population, so we had them watch all of our videos and complete the decision tool as though they would be enrolling in the next phase of our study. Our findings with this particular group is that it was consistent with previous research findings that we've conducted, in that participants were generally very confident in their decisional preferences around which results they would want to receive. And the majority of participants preferred learning everything that's available despite little familiarity with the reportable conditions. So I have several quotes that I'd like to share with you about why participants chose to prefer learn more. So as this quote shows, generally the adolescents would argue that they're curious, and if they knew that somebody could know something about them, then they would want to know it about themselves as well. They would hate to know that somebody knows something about them that they don't know if it's available. So this reflects this idea that more information is better for understanding about oneself. And yet there was a significant acknowledgement, particularly among the younger adolescents, that they as a group may not know that very much about genetics, and particularly not about rare genetic conditions or mutations that result in genetic conditions. And for them, it could make it harder to make decisions about return of results because they weren't necessarily familiar with these particular conditions, or even necessarily familiar with what constituted an adult onset condition, for instance, or what constituted a carrier trait. So despite the educational materials that we provided, there was some confusion about how to determine what counts as an adult onset condition. Is it adult onset if you could get it when you're 18, or would you have to be 40, for instance? Carrier traits resulted in quite a bit of confusion, which we think spoke to some low genetic literacy and lack of numeracy within these populations. Among the participants in our focus groups, there was quite a variety of preferences regarding parental involvement, regardless of the age of the participant. So for those who would want the parent involved, we often heard things like, I'd want them there as a guidance figure, but not necessarily making the choice. I'd want the final say, but I'd also want their opinion. It's consistent with our prior study. And for those who said they would not want a parent involved, they would argue, this is my body, this should be my decision. I need their approval if I'm under 18, but I don't want anything else. Now, at the same time, there was some recognition of the value of parental knowledge, or that parental knowledge might and perspective might be different from that of an adolescent. So for instance, one older adolescent argued that, your parents, a parental figure might help guide you and help you to recognize that this is more serious than just clicking yes or no on a screen. And at the same time, younger adolescent here said that, maybe adults would read more about it or pay more attention to these videos than I would. They just want to click right through. I want this and that, and I'm done. And after conducting our first set of focus groups, we learned that some of the adolescents weren't reading any of the instructions at all in the electronic decision tool. They would just go straight to the questions and click through them and be done in about 5 seconds. So we're trying to now figure out if there are ways that we can help with the pacing or embed in videos into the decision tool so that people will take a little bit more time, but we don't necessarily know that more time is going to change the kinds of decisions that people make, or if they're going to be more thoughtful about it. This is an open question for us still in the research. As a result of the segmenting our videos out, as I mentioned, we now have 6 educational videos, and we had the participants in our focus groups watch all of them. And though some of them are optional videos, those that stood out to the participants in these most recent focus groups were on the impact of decision on family. So as these quotes illustrate, there was a lot of recognition among the participants that genetic testing is likely to have results that would not just impact one as an individual, but rather would also have implications for their family, especially for their siblings and their parents. And what was particularly striking to me was that among the older adolescent group, there were some older adolescents who participated in our focus groups who themselves are parents. They had become parents during adolescence, and they may have already had some familiarity with genetic mutations, as in this case where we had a participant who was a sickle cell carrier, and her son is also a carrier. And she recognized that, any decisions that she would make about return of genomic research results is not just going to impact members of her family who are older, but also those who are younger, including a child or potential children in the future. And what these show us is that when we think about adolescence, and when we wrote the grant, we were interested in how adolescence is defined developmentally in phases of increasing maturity towards adulthood. And yet, there's quite a wide spectrum where we had some participants who are in middle school and have never actually learned anything about genetics in their education, their formal education, or in their healthcare, have had limited exposure to it. And then there are others at perhaps the older end of the spectrum who have quite a varied life experience. Some are not living with their families any longer. Some have children of their own. Some have much more familiarity with the ways in which healthcare systems and health insurance work, that it can impact the ways they think about the decisions around participating in research and what research results they would want returned to them. So speaking to that point, we also had a video that talked about how genomic research results that end up in the electronic medical record could have an impact on healthcare costs. And so what we heard in these focus groups was a reflection back about the potential impact of those types of results on willingness to participate in genomic research and considerations for what type of decisions people would want to receive. So as this quote shows, this is quite a young adolescent, I think maybe 13 or 14 years old. He said, "I'm not paying for healthcare, so I don't really know what it would look like if it had to increase or something like that." So they just are not very knowledgeable necessarily about what healthcare costs to begin with and how changes in healthcare costs may be dramatic or not. There was also a lot of reference in our discussions to the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act and insurability. These are 2 screenshots from the educational videos that we had, which indicated that health insurance companies can't deny insurance based on genetic testing, but individuals who have genetic results in their medical record could potentially be charged higher premiums or denied particular types of insurance, specifically life, disability, and long-term care insurance because of genetic test results, even those that are predictive rather than manifesting in a particular disease. So as this older adolescent suggested, young adults can be covered under their parents' insurance plans until they're 26 under the Patient Portability and Affordable Care Act. So he felt like his parents would like to be informed if their premiums could change based on a decision that he makes, and he would respect that because they're paying for it. And so we have to also consider the context in which we're conducting studies like this, in which young people may have a better sense of insurability than previous generations because of the Affordable Care Act. We have to take that into consideration when presenting the opportunity to participate in genomic research that could affect other people's insurance rates. So the implications of our studies to date are that our study decision tools and two-step decision-making processes, an independent decision-making process followed by a joint decision for younger adolescents, could be adapted to clinical settings and to future genomic studies. And to that end, we will be launching a clinical trial to assess the decision-making processes and decisional stability over time. We are hoping to launch it late summer or early fall. And our findings could be used to inform larger studies needed to build the evidence base for providing best practice statements in the rapidly evolving use of genomic testing in pediatric populations, both in the research and clinical contexts. Further questions that our current study isn't answering, but we hope the clinical trial may, are the degree to which potential impacts on family members and healthcare costs impact initial decisions, decision stability, and decisional regret around return of results. And we are going to be evaluating the utility of our study tools and the portability of these processes for populations with lower genetic and health literacy in a wide variety of life circumstances. Initially, we'll be starting this study in the Cincinnati region, which has a variety of urban and suburban and rural healthcare settings and community centers from which we can draw. We are thinking about partnering with the Cincinnati Recreation Commission, which offers before and after school programs, as well as a variety of educational opportunities outside of school hours that may help us with recruitment processes. I'd like to acknowledge the funders for this research, the National Human Genome Research Institute's eMERGE grant and my own research investigator-initiated project, and my collaborators on these efforts. I'd particularly like to thank my co-PI, Melanie Myers, and Cindy Prowse, who started this project before I even got to Cincinnati Children's, and they've been wonderful partners in this process. So I'd love to take your questions, and if you have any other questions after this, you're always welcome to reach out to me. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan. Let's see me. That was great. I love the forging ahead in an area in which there is much proclamation but little evidence.
Right.
The AC exactly. 5659. Nice.
Exactly.
Does anyone have any questions from the group? Thoughts, comments? We have in the group those that have experience conducting research, decision making, and information processing in adolescents. So I'd be interested in if any of them have any questions. All right, I'll start. So it was interesting. One of the comments from one of the participants was, someone would know something about me that I didn't know myself. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting angle on knowledge is power that is usually the case. Usually you hear, like the quintessential one trotted out at the genomics meetings is, knowing is better, as if there's this preparation, this anticipatory, mm-hmm. Like I could know some things that happens in newborn screening, I could know some things so that I could do something quicker, be access to treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But that was a distinctly different lens, which is, mm-hmm. someone knows something about, it's a power, mm-hmm. it's a power differential piece. Did you see that? I mean, I know it was qualitative, but did you see that in a lens of populations which had been disadvantaged? Is that a lens that we see because disability, because of race, ethnicity, et cetera?
Right. No, I think that's a great question. And we have heard similar types of rhetoric from populations that have historically been disenfranchised by the biomedical research community. In this case, I think it speaks more to hierarchies of power associated with age. And so in the context of these conversations, our participants were more concerned that perhaps their parent or their doctor or their health insurance company or researchers might know something about them and they're keeping it from them. And that this is an appeal to be included in the conversation, but also an appeal to be recognized as decision makers in the process. And so we did, of course, also hear the standard knowledge is power. It's better for me to know more about myself. But on the contrary, we also heard some participants, and I didn't present all of this because there's just too much of it, but in our genetics and medicine paper, we have nice examples of participants who said, having more knowledge will help me to prepare for my life. So these are clearly people who are thinking about themselves at the beginning of their lives as opposed to some other point in their lives. And some saw getting more information about themselves, genetic or otherwise, to help them to plan for their future and what kind of life they want to have.
Construct of like, I want to plan. This is just one of the many constructs in which I.
Right, exactly. And then we also had, in contrast, some people who thought, I don't want to get any information that's going to worry me or change the course of my life that I want for myself. So we would hear participants say that they, were some of the psychosocial impact they were worried about is that the people might consider them fragile if they had some sort of genetic risk factor, or that they didn't want their parents to feel guilty about having had them, if they passed along a genetic trait. And there was a pretty healthy mix, in terms of those that were, who mentioned psychosocial impacts of getting this kind of information. But to speak to your original question, I think really what we're hearing is that adolescents want to be recognized as not just pawns in the research process or in healthcare. And this is widely recognized among adolescent healthcare providers and those who subscribe to the developmental model of informed decision making. That ascent doesn't start when you're 16. It starts like right around when you're 5 or 6. And some have historically used this like sevens rule, the rule of sevens. But I understand that this in bioethics is even quite outdated, that we shouldn't think about age as a clear, stark marker that, something doesn't, a light switch doesn't go off at age 7 or 14 or 18 or 21, that suddenly enables a capacity to participate in decision-making, but rather that we need to assess each child individually.
It makes it cleaner from an organizational and risk perspective.
Sure,
right.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't recognize real life. Yeah.
Right. And as an ethicist, I like the messy stuff. So to me, this is much more comforting, like this idea that we could never have any simple answers around when the cutoff to engage adolescence is going to be. Because there were clearly some participants who, especially in this most recent group of focus groups that we conducted, that were, on the older end of the spectrum, who I felt seemed more poorly equipped than those who had much higher engagement with the healthcare system already. So the less people were engaged in the healthcare for themselves or other family members,
just an earned piece of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Further it.
And that's why I think to a certain extent, the research advisory committees that we engaged in this process for just testing our tools are useful but limited. So those who are volunteering to be part of a research advisory committee already have a particular degree of investment in research that they're willing to engage in the process of informing and advising researchers. And so I'll be really curious to see how much these tools resonate when we go into work with populations that have potentially even less familiarity with genetics or biomedical research, than those populations we've engaged already.
Interesting. That's helpful. The developmental lens. I get it. That makes sense. Questions from anyone else? Thoughts, comments? One new message. Hold on. Oh, I have, can you share some of your wins and challenges? Oh, this is a pragmatic piece.
Yeah.
Doing this research with COVID.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I mean, the first challenge is that our original study design had been to conduct all focus groups and study visits in person. And we had kind of built in this like
wrote into the R1.
Yeah, into the grant proposal and our IRB proposal too. So, we had one line in the grant proposal that said, we're going to ask some of these research advisory board members what they think about the possibility of doing study visits via telehealth.
Okay.
And
they're like impossible.
So it was a one line of a 12-page grant. And suddenly that has become, all we've been working on for the last 3 months is try to convert all of our study materials so that they can be used at home or wherever people are, and on their own without having a member of the study team there with them to walk through the process, and then meet with us via telehealth.
Do you e-consent them or do you waive the documentation?
Yeah, that's what we're planning now is e-consent. So we haven't started it yet because we weren't really ready to go. Our materials were still, we conducted our last focus groups in early March. And actually, if you read the transcripts now, people are like, are you doing this because of Corona? And we're like, what? No, we're not. But, sadly, it becomes relevant. And I think that what we're finding is that the systems are available to do this kind of work remotely, but there are pressures or preconceived notions around enrolling children in research remotely that have just taken a few extra hurdles in the process.
Preconceived notions?
Well, I mean, like this idea of e-consent, is, at least at our institution, to be perfectly frank, seems a little antiquated. Like they seem very protectionist about, wanting to ensure that nobody's consenting on behalf of the adolescent. So they want to make sure that you're signing on video and seeing them.
So it's not an understanding issue. It's a documentation forgery issue.
Yeah, it's a compliance issue, I think, more than anything. Yeah. So I would say that's been one hurdle. But, it's just really slowed us down more than anything, is that we had planned to be enrolling in this next phase of our, under NIH's new rules is considered a clinical trial, because we have an intervention. But so it delayed our launch by probably 3 months, converting everything over to telehealth, because at our own institution, in the research ramp up back to, I shouldn't say back to normalcy, it's in the new normal. The kind of work that I do conducting interviews and focus groups wasn't even in the research ramp up plan. So all face-to-face, kind of clinical research has been really, really slowed down. So we've had to be nimble and adapt, but it's just slow to do it. I would say that has been the biggest challenge. We'll see. In some ways, actually, so another adjacent arm of our study is now some of the participants from eMERGE 3 are getting their results back. And we are conducting interviews with participants who have gotten positive results and carrier results, and then some negative results just to kind of compare to them. And it's much easier to schedule people now than it was prior to COVID, because more people have fewer obligations on their time. Parents and adolescents appear to be in the same space more often, at least early in the pandemic. Maybe that's wearing thin for people, but so it could have that little silver lining as well. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, well, yes, and I think the population is a good one to start in. It's not the adolescents are facile with technology.
Right, they are. I mean, I think that the technology limitations, or sort of like the broader connectivity challenges that we've been hearing a lot about in the news in relation to remote education, persist in this context as well. So if we're expecting people to watch online videos and participate in a decision tool and a study visit that could be, you know, an hour long, because we're doing baseline measures and having them conduct a bunch of surveys and those types of things. If you're working with a population that their main source of access to the internet is a mobile device and they have data caps, then this is going to be a hindrance to participation or research. And I'm talking about this more in a hypothetical because we haven't measured whether or not this is actually happening, but I think that there could be.
Will you be able to?
Yeah, I mean, we will be able to. And we also have considered the possibility of bringing our own devices to people with hotspots so that they don't have to rely on their own technology and that this won't be a deterrent. We're just trying to be as flexible and adaptable as possible. If people want paper tools, we can do that. We can't turn the videos into paper, obviously, but we can bring the tools to people. So we're hiring a community health worker who is going to be working on our project. So yeah, we're rolling with the times.
Nice work. Nice work. Very, very agile. And very
thank you.
One last question, unless there's another one from the group. I'll just suck up all the question time. Is there any? Feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. Do you have, or has there been any use of the medical minimizer maximizer scale? Have you seen this scale?
Oh, I have heard about it, but I don't think it's one of the scales that we're planning to use. Would you recommend it?
Well, maybe. I don't know. Dr. Scherer, who was supposed to speak here, who I worked with at Michigan, is now at Colorado, is the creator, I believe the creator of it. And so it might be valuable as a thought.
Yeah, if you want to send it along, that'd be great. Yeah. We do have, like, I
don't know that it's used in adolescents. That's why I was like, oh.
Right. Well, some of the tools that we're using haven't been used in adolescents. You know, one of the things that we are including in this clinical trial is baseline measures of decisional stability. And then we have like a 3-month and then a 12-month follow-up. And the 12-month follow-up will go to everybody. And then we'll do interviews with people who have got positive results or carrier results that were returned to them. And healthcare utilization scales are one of the things that we're using is, and I don't know if that's related to this minimizer, maximizer sort
What's
of.
That one?
I don't remember the name of it, but it's like a healthcare utilization scale to see like how much people actually engage the healthcare system during a particular time period.
Oh yeah, I'll send you this one and you can send me that one. I asked because we're supposed to do utilization sub-study on our grant. I was going to do a diary, but these other scales might be useful.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to share any of the scales that we're using. They've all been used in other studies, I believe, but not always with adolescents. And
it's pediatric. Nothing ever gets used in children, even the medicines we prescribed. Don't get
exactly. Yeah.
So, excellent. Well, thank you. That was great.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. It's nice to see you. And thank you all for participating today. If you have any other questions, we'll be happy to answer them. So
perfect. Thanks. And then, I'll send along the minimizer maximizer thing.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Take care. Okay. Bye.